folks. Welcome to Virtual History Pub. We'll just take a few minutes to wait for everyone to get logged on and get the Facebook live stream started. So welcome to History Pub. We're so happy you're here. As folks log on, we just want to let you know you can use the chat function down at the bottom of your screen to send notes to us or each other or comment on our speaker's brilliance. Your Welcome History Pub regulars will know we often ask how many people are new to History Pub. So feel free to use the chat to say hello and let us know if this is your first History Pub or your first virtual program or if you're a pro at all this. And then we'll generally be drawing from the Q&A function so that we can have questions. So welcome everybody. Hello everyone on Facebook. We're happy to be streaming live on Facebook, and we'll just give it a couple minutes as we wait for everyone to get into the virtual room. You're welcome to use the chat to say hello. Let us know if you've ever attended a History Pub before, or if this virtual History Pub is your first one. Maybe you're a History Pub regular. So welcome. Thanks, folks, for saying hello. Welcome to History Pub. Hi. Oh, this is great. Make sure as you log on, on your computer audio. Hi, folks. Welcome to History Pub. We're just letting folks log in a little bit. Hello to Manzanita. Hello to Gwen Carr and Oregon Black Pioneers. Wonderful to see you.
Hi, Gwen.
We miss seeing you live too. This is great. Hi there, everyone. Thank you. And that's right. We cannot see you. Someone's asked if you can't see us. We're using a broadcast feature, so you can't turn your camera or audio on, but please communicate with us via the chat and put your questions in the Q&A so we'll be able to find those when it's time. Well, welcome everyone to History Pub. We're so pleased to have you here. My name's Eliza Canty-Jones. I'm with the Oregon Historical Society. We're one of the proud sponsors of History Pub. We've been sponsors of History Pub for over a decade, and we've been doing them on the last Monday of every month at the Kennedy School until we were stopped by public safety requirements earlier this year due to COVID. And we're really pleased to have learned how to use the digital options to be able to bring you this programming virtually in your homes. And someone's noted that it's nice to not be turned away because there aren't enough seats. It's true. There's room for everyone at Virtual History Pub. We're so grateful to McMenamins for all of the incredible work that company has done to preserve historic places, to preserve the stories of our past, and to sponsor so many events like History Pub to help bring good history to public audiences. So thank you. Exactly, Melissa's showing off her Ruby. I hope some of you have also picked up some to go from your local McMenamins. Beer and tots will make it really feel like History Pub. So I'll say the mission of the Oregon Historical Society is to preserve our state's history and make it accessible to everyone in ways that advance knowledge and inspire curiosity about all the people, places, and events that have shaped Oregon. We do that work in a lot of different ways. Obviously, a lot of online digital content right now is what we're doing. So if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, go to ohs.org and scroll to the bottom to do that. Definitely follow us on our social media accounts, and you can keep track of all of our blog posts and new materials that are going up on our digital collections website and other virtual programs like this one that we have on offer. Some virtual programs that we're doing right now are our behind the scenes series, and that's special just for members of the Oregon Historical Society. So all the members in the audience, thank you so much for your membership. We really appreciate that. If you're interested in becoming a member of OHS, check us out on our website. We've got a lot of great member benefits, including a subscription to the Oregon Historical Quarterly. We're grateful for everyone who supports the Oregon Historical Society, all of our wonderful volunteers, our corporate donors, the foundations who support us, the individuals who support us, And of course, many folks know Multnomah County residents have twice voted to enact a modest property tax levy that supports our work and the work of 4 historical societies in East Multnomah County. Thank you so much, Multnomah County voters. We couldn't do it without you, and we're really grateful for your support. So the museum is open Wednesdays through Sundays now. We have a lot of restrictions in place to make sure that it's a safe place to be for everyone, but we would love to see you come in and see our exhibit on Nevertheless They Persisted, a history of the 19th Amendment and women's voting rights. It's an Oregon and national history. And also, we have just opened We Are the Rose City, which is a history of soccer in Portland. So come check out the museum. We'll be glad to have you whenever you'd like to be there. I am so excited about tonight's speaker. Melissa Darby is a visiting research scholar in the Department of Anthropology at Portland State University and a private consultant in cultural resource management. She has worked for over 30 years as an archaeologist and historian in the Northwest and is a noted authority on the ethnohistory of Native people of Western Oregon. She's here to present to us tonight on her first book, I believe, Thunder Go North, which is the product of years of wide-ranging and important research. Some of you who are members of OHS and got a recent OHQ with the book reviews in it, saw the review of her work. And Melissa is also a History Pub regular. And so we're really excited to have her on the other side of the microphone tonight. So before I turn it over, just a quick reminder to feel free to use the chat to communicate with us. And also please put your questions in the Q&A. If you're watching on Facebook Live, put your questions in there and we'll get them over to us over here. And we'll be doing Q&A at the end of the presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Melissa, and we're all clapping very loudly. You just can't hear everybody. So welcome, Melissa Darby.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I'm so grateful to be here. I hope everyone has their Ruby or their Terminator or whatever their favorite brew is. So I'm just going to start. That's what you want to hear. The title of my talk tonight is Thunder Go North, The Hunt for Sir Francis Drake's Fair and Good Bay. Oops, went too far. Here we go. Francis Drake was not yet Sir Francis when he circumnavigated the globe in what became known as the famous voyage. This was the second circumnavigation of the globe after Magellan and the first to return with its commander, Drake. During the voyage in the summer of 1579, a long time ago, Drake with his crew of 80 men and 1 pregnant Black woman camped and repaired their ship in a fair and good bay somewhere on the west coast of America. The theory that they spent the summer on the Oregon coast is at present unimaginable to many scholars, and uncritical acceptance of the dominant theory that Drake was in California is understandably, the norm. Today I'm going to go over the reasons why people have been misled into thinking that he was in California and misled about his movements in the Pacific and the geographical location of his fair and good bay. Reason 1, it was a secret mission. The plan of Drake's voyage was a closely guarded secret. The crew thought they were heading to Alexandria to load a cargo of currants, and they didn't go to Egypt. As soon as they set sail and went a little way, Drake announced that they were headed to the Pacific Ocean, where no English ship had voyaged before. This is British historian Eva Taylor. By chance, she found the manuscript with the plans of Drake's voyage in 1929. This was pretty late in the whole theorizing of where Drake went. This manuscript had been overlooked, its edges are burnt, but it still retains most of the detailed instructions of the voyage, which called for Drake to look for trade commodities such as spice, drugs, scarlet dye, and other commodities like fur and minerals. He was also instructed to look for the Northwest Passage. the purported passage that would bring him home from the North Pacific to England. This was before England had any land claims. England had not colonized anything yet, and he was to find a land claim, England's first land claim. But this document specified he couldn't claim any land already claimed by any other Christian, quote unquote, prince. Drake's circumnavigation of the world began 5 years before Raleigh's ill-fated colony of Roanoke was established, 30 years before Jamestown, and more than 4 decades before the Pilgrims came to America in the Mayflower. This was a long time ago. With regards to the scarlet dye, I think it's very interesting that the Elizabethans valued scarlet dye. Red dye was used, the red color was used for people of high class, high social standing in the Elizabethan Tudor world. So that this was written into his instructions, I find interesting. And it's also no small point that this voyage was conducted with Queen Elizabeth's support, and it was launched as a covert operation under the disguise of piracy. So quickly, I'm going to kind of go over the voyage. They began their voyage in Plymouth. They headed south. They touched briefly on the North African coast, did a little bit of raiding in the Cape Verdes Islands and captured a Portuguese ship and a Portuguese pilot. They sailed down to the coast of South America and wintered in Patagonia. And then in August, they got to their first important objective, which was the Strait of Magellan. Taken from east to west, the strait is really perilous when the winds are bad, and the winds are typically bad. So when they finally got through the strait, there was only 3 ships left. They had scuttled a couple of ships before they got there. The wind and the gales blew them south 200 leagues. For 52 days, they couldn't put up sail. They were in bitter, bitter cold and waves that were huge, humongous. Finally, the weather cleared and they were able to take a reading, and they were very far south. And Drake discovered that there was a passage between the Atlantic and the Pacific that's now called Drake's Passage. Before, they thought Antarctica connected to the South American continent, and the only way through was through Magellan Strait. So the 3 ships that were left worked their way north. One got in another storm and wrecked. They were never seen again. The other ship saw the Strait of Magellan, took it, and then hightailed it back to England because they were afraid. The only one left was Francis Drake and his crew of about 80 men on the Golden Hind. So he was alone on the far side of the world. So they sailed up and they got to Mocha Island. They were attacked by the natives who thought they were Spanish. Drake got an arrow right below his eye into the side of his face. His assistant, Diego, who was a freedman that he had brought from Panama several years earlier, Diego got 20 arrows in him from this skirmish. And he died many months later. He lived for a while, but he did die many months later. But he was Drake's assistant on the voyage. So they sailed up and started raiding along the coast of South America. They amassed a huge amount of treasure. They raided the Porto Calo and tried to free some of Drake's comrades who had been captured the year earlier. They got further north and they captured a ship with some Chinese porcelains and some cloth and some clothes. And there was a woman on board whose name was Maria. She was a Cimarron or Black Moor or Black woman. And they freed her as well. And so she came aboard. At Guatalco, they freed 3 more Black men, and 2 of that crew came aboard. So Drake had several Black folks as crew on his ship. They were paid members of the crew. and they continued north out of Mexico. They had captured so much silver that they had ballasted the ship with silver bars. Let's see, next. Okay. This is the Golden Hind, the only ship that was left. They did sail up to the northwest coast. Probably they sighted Canada or somewhere at the latitude of 48 degrees, and the ship was leaking. They were in dire straits. They had a storm at sea, and it had opened the leak that had been with them since Panama, and they needed to find a fair bay so that they could careen the ship over on a sandy beach that had no breakers so that they could actually get to the leak and caulk it. And they needed to ready the ship. They had captured one more ship. They had one little ship with them where 20 men were, and then this ship had 60 or so men, but they needed to repair it so that they could go across the Pacific Ocean, which, you know, you had to have a good ship to get across the ocean. So they stayed in this, they found a fair bay, and they made their way into it, and they careened the ship. They stayed for either 5 weeks or 10 weeks. The records are inconsistent on this point. And they met the Native Americans. They had a big council with the Native American leader who came down to talk to them, and they built a little fort. They were there for quite a while. As the ship was being repaired, Drake and his officers went inland and explored the country, and they noted the plants there and the animals that they saw there, and it was quite an exploration. Then at the end of August in 1579, they loaded up, had finished repairs, and then they headed across the Pacific. It was a hard crossing. Diego died probably of scurvy during the crossing. Well, they got to the Spice Islands, and they opened a trade with England, with the Sultan there. And then they went to an island that they called Crab Island. It was a paradise full of food and fruits, and it was just a beautiful place. And there they left the very heavily pregnant Maria and her other Black comrades. And then they took off. They had a few more adventures. They loaded some rice while they were in Java. They almost died off of Mozambique for want of water. They rounded the Cape of Good Hope and went up to the Guinea coast, where they loaded a supply of lemons and saw elephants. It was very exciting. And at the end of September in 1580, they finally returned to their home port of Plymouth. Upon the return, Queen Elizabeth confiscated all the records of the voyage. The crew was made to swear an oath not to reveal to anyone where they had been or what they had done, on pain of death. So the second circumnavigation of the globe, they could not announce it and celebrate it and say, we did this, we went around the world. No, it was a secret mission. So let's look at reason 2 about why there is so much confusion and controversy as to where Drake sailed. Reason 2, it was an illegal land grab. The latitudes reported in the official account were falsified in order to claim more land than on the West Coast than England could under the colonial claiming rules of the time. So the official account said they came in from the Pacific at 42 degrees, and then they sailed down and found Fair and Good Bay at 38 degrees. But the unpublished version of the official latitude, which is called the anonymous narrative, which I figured out was a draft of the official account, an abstract of Fletcher's account, the chaplain that went with them. The unpublished latitude said 48, they came in at 48, and then their Fair and Good Bay was found at 44 degrees, north latitude. So I think when Drake got back and they looked at the map, the Queen said, look, this is Spain's northern boundary. We're not going to leave this gap. We're going to claim land all the way down here. And that's what they did. So another reason why they couldn't have sailed straight up to California is the wind in the Pacific and the trade winds in the Pacific go in a circular direction. So they had to swing out 800 leagues, according to the official account, in order to find a way to come in. So this is, sailors among you may know that on a square-sailed ship, you have to sail this way. So this is a depiction of their fair and good bay. Here is where their camp was. Here is a Native American burning a sacrifice. When Drake landed, the Native people thought that he was a god. And so they started burning these things as sacrifices to him. And I cover more of this in my book because I describe the Native American customs on the coast and why they were doing this. But here there are other natives making sacrifices, and one right here. And this is probably the ship that was left with 20 men, which has never been seen or heard of since. We don't know what happened. Here's the 20 men. But this bay has a cape to the south, a mountainous region here, a long peninsula, and an island off the peninsula. So this is what Drake's Bay, Drake's real bay, looked like. So it's possible, and since the 50s, there's been people thinking that this might have been Drake's Bay. A guy named Stan Allen, who was the captain of the Trade Winds ship, who used to take tours in here, first proposed it. And then in the 70s, Bob Ward from England really promoted it and proposed it. And I think he's right. I think they're right. The shape of the cove is a good match. There's a mountainous area here, a cape down here, but I was wondering about the island, and then I looked at the LIDAR, and I think that 400 years of erosion on the Oregon coast would have made it so that if there was an island here, it is now underwater, and in Drake's time, this might have been above water given sea level changes and subduction zone earthquakes and so forth. So I think this is the best candidate for where Drake may have spent the summer of 1579. So this is Zelia Nuttall. In 1908, she was in the Mexican archives and she found a trove of documents about Drake and the voyage. And some of these were depositions from mayors of the towns he raided, from captains of the ships that he looted, and from pilots and from bystanders and all sorts of people. And a couple of them said, oh yeah, he's destined. He told us he was going to go look for the Northwest Passage, and one of the pilots confirmed that that was his idea. So she was very intrigued with these documents. So she went to Europe and found more documents, and she came out with a theory that Drake was never in California at all, and that he had sailed further north. Here's a map that she found, and she noted that Drake said there were 5 or 6 islands when they came in from the Pacific, like maybe Vancouver Island or the San Juans. She said that there was snow, that Drake recorded snow-capped mountains, which could be the Olympics. She also was, as an anthropologist, she understood the cultural, excuse me, I gotta try my ruby. She understood the ethnographic and cultural data, and it's known that on the Miwok on the California coast, where a lot of people think Drake landed, they have grass houses, kind of willow frame huts, and then they have reed boats. But Drake and Fletcher and the accounts describe plank houses and wooden canoes, or canoes, which we assume are wooden canoes. So Drake described the houses made of planks and dug into the ground, and that is a better fit for the Northwest coast. And I think she knew that. She traveled up to Cape Flattery and met people of the Makah culture, before she finished writing her monograph on it. And her monograph is lost, but we do have an outline of her findings, which I found at the Bancroft Library. Nuttall's theory on the northern limits in the Pacific was not very well received by the California historians, especially Herbert Bolton, who created a subterfuge to shut down her and her theory. In 1915, she presented her research at the big history conference in San Francisco that was held that year, and it was partly organized by Herbert Bolton. Her paper was met with coldness from Bolton and his colleagues, and they set out to scuttle her work. We've got to remember that in 1915, when she was talking about this, California was polishing Drake's swashbuckling legend by the fraternal organization known as the Native Sons of the Golden West. These people extolled California history. It was, membership was regulated, and only white males who had been born in California were allowed to join. And in the early 20th century California, the Native Sons were aggressive proponents of white supremacy. This group was a sponsor of Herbert Bolton and provided scholarships to his students to do studies abroad. They were influential and politically active, and the organization promoted legislation to exclude Mexicans, Chinese, and Japanese from the state of California. These people were especially concerned about Mexicans, who they racialized as dark-skinned, mixed-blood mongrels who should be kept south of the border. So Drake was a centerpiece of her golden history, and to lose him by the efforts of this woman, a Hispanic and Irish background, who had Hispanic and Irish background. She was a single mother, divorced Catholic, and one who preferred the company of equally beautiful and accomplished women. Well, that was too much for them to consider, so Nuttall's work was never published, except for an outline of her thesis is now lost. As I mentioned above, historian Eva Taylor in the 30s walked in her footsteps and was finding documents and maps that supported Nuttall's theory, including a document that showed that the Native American language that Drake encountered could be of the Chinookan language, and the Chinookans are not in California. So just as Taylor's work was changing minds and the Northwest Coast theory of Drake's Landing was gaining traction at home and abroad, it was dramatically eclipsed when the alleged plate made by Drake to mark his land claim was found on a hillside above San Francisco Bay. This is Herbert Bolton, and the finder on the left. He was given $3,500 in exchange for the plate, and this was during the Depression, and people thought, oh, it must be real if Herbert Bolton, that famous historian, is paying that much money for it. The plate did not just put Bolton in the limelight, it bolstered more private support for his programs. And I found that this man, Herbert Bolton, was a serial hoaxer, and that the plate of brass was his brainchild, and he created the plate of brass to shut down the discussion that Drake was further north as proposed by Nuttall and Taylor. The man who authenticated the plate of brass is the one who made it. Herbert Bolton was a white supremacist. His mission was to exalt the white race. His doctoral thesis was a racist document about the free Negro in the South, where he called blacks idle, the descendants of heathens, and unfit to testify in court. He touted the plate of brass as an authentic artifact because it called attention to a white English hero, white manifest destiny, and Drake was the golden knight of that golden state of California. He was already the most famous historian in America, perhaps, in the United States. He'd been recognized internationally. He received a knighthood from the King of Spain in honor of his research into Spanish borderlands. He also received a knighthood from Italy, where he was Knight Commander of the Crown of Italy. The Pope awarded him with a membership in the Order of St. Sylvester. He served as president of the American Historical Association in 1932. He held the Slather Professorship at Berkeley, very prestigious. And according to his biographer, his graduate corps was formidable with 104 doctoral students that he initiated or doctored or whatever. He had 323 master's degree students. That's a lot. That's a lot. His students taught not only at the university level, many of them became high school teachers. He influenced several generations of historians over his career. He modeled how history was taught, what history was taught. He was on several editorial boards and influenced what was published in journals and in high school textbooks. His influence was systemic. He was one of the reasons Black history was ignored, the genocide of Native Americans was brushed over, and women's history was not even mentioned. Many of Bolton's colleagues did dislike him. His detractors thought of him as a huckster and glory seeker who courted publicity. And I examined Bolton's papers and correspondence at the Bancroft Library and at the University of California, where he was director of the Bancroft from 1920 to 1940. He was a history professor even longer than that. I found that the plate was not only his only hoax. He made boasts and claims that were misleading and outright lies. Spanish treasure was a theme in no less 3 of his hoaxes, and pirate treasure in another one. Anyway, enough of him. He also had a hand in the Dare Stone, which I figured out, and it can now be declared a hoax. This stone was found in North Carolina 6 months after the plate was brought to light, and it's also inscribed with crude block letters. And the finder was also given some money, but the money was sent to Oakland, which is virtually right next door to Berkeley. This is a cobble purportedly inscribed in 1591 with a message from one of Roanoke's lost colonists, Eleanor Dare, to her father, telling him of the fate of the colony. I talk about that more in my book, and so I'll just leave it at that. So, enough of white supremacy, geez. Okay. Between 1937 and 1977, everyone thought that the plate was real. In 1977, they finally figured out that it was a fraud, but they didn't figure out who did it or why. They just thought it might be some sort of prank. So while everyone was thinking that this plate was real, in California, they were arguing over each other on which bay was the bay, the true bay where Drake landed. Was it at Drake's Bay, Bolinas Lagoon, San Quentin Cove, San Francisco Bay, or a couple of others that people came up with? These are the conjectured bays. This debate has been called the great-grandfather of all questions in California history and almost a minor industry in the Bay Area. Since the 1970s, this question has been a tug of war between non-academic vociferous proponents who assert their bay is a true one. Okay, the 4th reason why people have been misled into thinking that Drake was in California is the national landmark status of Drake's Bay, in part based on the Chinese porcelain ceramics that one of the groups, the Drake's Bay group, says some of them were from Drake's cargo. a Spanish ship came by in 1595 looking for Drake's Fair Bay, which, you know, they were misled by the official account that said it was at 38 degrees. And so they went into the bay at 38 degrees and immediately they became shipwrecked. Their cargo strewn on the beach. And some of this cargo was these Chinese porcelains. And this group at Drake's Bay says, oh, some of these were from Drake, so we can tell the difference. But they wrote a national landmark nomination for Drake's Bay, partly on the basis of these, but the archaeologists working for the National Park Service said, no, not so fast. These are all from the Spanish shipwreck that wrecked there later. And they determined that none of them were from Drake's cargo. And the National Park Service, after many edits and changes, agreed to an awkwardly qualified statement of significance that said, okay, well, maybe Drake was here, but the significance of this landmark nomination is the Spanish shipwreck and the first contact episode with these Native Americans there, the Miwok. Those qualifying words really disappointed the Drake's Bay advocates. And they not only chose to ignore them, they announced to news media and TV and in TV interviews that these supported their contention. And then when the National Landmark nomination came through, they went on TV and they made a press release that said that the Drake's Bay National Historic Landmark gave formal recognition to Francis Drake's landing at Drake's Cove in 1579. That was an untruth. And the fourth reason why people have been misled into thinking that Drake was in California. It should be noted that national landmark nominations can be easily amended and that an amendment with the appropriate correction has been finished and recently sent to the Washington, D.C. National Park Service office so that the interpreters at the Point Reyes station at Drake's Bay will have the most recent and correct information with which to interpret Drake's Bay. So now I'm shifting gears here. We know the reasons why people have been misled. So now let's look at some reasons why Drake may have the evidence of Drake on the Oregon coast. There's only scant archaeological evidence of Europeans being on the coast. There's a chisel found in an archaeological context that dates to about 1600, the carbon date, and that was found near Yachats. There was an English silver coin dating from 1560 that was reportedly found on a beach in Nehalem Bay after the 1962 Columbus Day storm. Though the source of this information and the coin remain elusive to me, the most compelling evidence is the cultural evidence. And in support of Zelia Nuttall's findings, she was right that the semi-underground plank houses Drake described are a better match for the Oregon coast than the California coast. This is a Tolowa men's sweat house or living, they slept in it at night. Here they did not sleep on bed platforms per se, they slept on the floor that was strewn with rushes, and that's exactly what Drake and Fletcher's account said, is that their floor was strewn with rushes. This is an image of Drake being crowned with a feather crown by the Native Americans. Drake interpreted this to mean that they were giving him sovereignty over the land, and that's not, that was a huge misinterpretation. It's a specific tradition still practiced by the Native tribes on the Oregon coast to present as gifts feathered crowns to their guests. The other thing I wanted to point out in this image is the Native American is wearing a fur cloak, and Drake was very intrigued by the animal that produced this fur cloak. It was a beautiful fur, and he wanted to know more about it because the pelt was beautiful. They told him it was up in the country, so he he went with his men and explored the country where he saw this animal in warrens, and he noted that this animal puts its food in its cheeks. It has a long bald tail, and it looked like the Barbary coney. So this is the Barbary coney, the Cape Hyrax, which is what they would see when they were on the coast of Africa. This is the animal they saw, and they called it a coney. The California theorists think that Drake's coney was the pocket gopher, but pocket gophers are hardly ever seen above ground. They do have a bald tail, but it's pretty small, so it'd be really hard to make pelts out of this animal. So on the Oregon coast and in Oregon, in Western Oregon, the theorists have proposed that it was the muskrat, and I concur with that Drake's coney was probably the muskrat because it's got a long bald tail, it carries food in its cheeks, it has feet like a mole like they described, and the fur is beautiful, and it's lightweight, it's waterproof, and here's a picture of a Native American, a Cowlitz woman wearing a muskrat fur cloak. Lewis and Clark described that the people typically went naked, but they had muskrat fur cloaks in bad weather. So we have a lot of ethnographic evidence to support that Drake's coney was the muskrat. Okay, Drake also described the Native American basketry that they encountered. He said that they decorate their baskets with the matted down of red feathers. And on the Oregon coast, the matted down of red-headed woodpecker heads was twisted onto sinew and sewn on as embroidery into regalia and baskets. In more modern times, beads and silk thread replaced this bright red thread. But, you know, I think it's interesting that Drake noticed this thread. On the Oregon coast, the matted red feathers of red-headed woodpeckers were twisted into string and used as a bright scarlet thread to decorate these things. The feathers were quite beautiful, and on the Miwok do have feathered baskets, but they're raised feathers, they're different, they're not matted feathers. So there are 5 words and 2 phrases that were spoken by the people that Drake encountered at the fair in Good Bay. And these were recorded by Drake and Fletcher, and Eva Taylor found some in Maddox's diary. So I mentioned before that Eva Taylor had a linguist study these, and he found that the people at the fair in Good Bay may have been speaking a Chinookan language. It seems likely that they were speaking some Chinook jargon words to Drake. My thesis was on an important root called Wapato. Also, one of the versions of that name is Pota or Wapatu. So the Chinook jargon word is Wapato or Pota. Lewis and Clark describe it as a very important route for the people who lived in Western Oregon and Washington. Drake recorded the word Peta, which I believe is the word, same as the word Wapato. He also recorded the word that they use for the bread made from this root. He recorded it as cheap or sheep, I'm not sure. And then, but the Chinook jargon word is Sapolil or Caplil. So that's kind of a mouthful, but I think it's a pretty good close match. The other one I find very intriguing is when Drake arrived and the emissaries came out, the emissaries came and were telling him that Hio, Hio, and Drake thought, oh, Hio, Hio, that must mean the king is coming. And so he said, Hio, Hio. So in Chinook jargon, Hio, Hio means we're having a formal gathering. He said it twice, formal gathering. So Drake wrote down in his book, oh yeah, Hio means leader, but it really means formal gathering. So this is also strong evidence that Drake encountered people who spoke a Chinook jargon, and that was not spoken among the Miwok on the California coast. Just after Taylor found the word list and published her findings and speculation, the Plate of Brass, of course, was launched, which ended further speculation that Drake was among people who spoke a language spoken on the Northwest coast. Zelia Nuttall and Eva Taylor had trespassed on the high ground of a California myth and found that to take Drake out of California was akin to pulling up the redwoods. The barriers that Herbert Bolton and the other Californians threw up against these women defeated them at the time, but it did not diminish them. And in this new light, it is those men that are diminished. And these, I think I have redeemed these women. My favorite women. Okay, so the Northwest Coast theory of Drake's Landing is still unimaginable to many people, and uncritical acceptance of the dominant paradigm of California landing is still understandably the norm. People have been misled because Drake's voyage was a secret mission. The Queen put out false information about the land claim, and racist California historians wanted to keep Drake as their golden hero, and a booster club in California wants to keep Drake as its mascot. What has been missing in this whole discussion over the years is a critical analysis of the larger context of the voyage and a discussion of the social and cultural importance of the voyage. Look, there are significant Native American stories and Black history stories associated with this voyage that have been downplayed or ignored. And in conclusion, I find it intriguing that the events on the Oregon coast many, many, many years ago, 400 years plus, inspired Shakespeare. The circumnavigation by Drake was such a triumph for England that Shakespeare named his theater the Globe. Additionally, the narrative events at the fair in Good Bay provided the playwright with inspiration for his play, The Tempest, which began with a storm and a shipwreck and included a native who worshiped the strange new people as gods and featured a pregnant Black woman who was left by sailors on an island in the middle of the ocean. So that's my talk. So I am here to take questions, and hopefully I can answer your questions. There's Eliza. Hi, Eliza.
Hi. Hooray.
Okay.
Great
so
job.
I am ready to take questions. Is there a trick for me to see the questions?
No, I will speak them out loud to you. So
okay, I am ready.
Okay, and I should note also a contractual obligation that the book is also available for sale at the OHS Museum store, where your OHS membership discount applies, and you can call and have them send it to you also if you don't care to come into the museum right now. So we have we have several questions already, so thanks folks for getting those in. The first one, someone wanted to know how many people were lost as they were losing ships coming around the Atlantic and then trying to get around into the Pacific. How many people were lost in that?
A lot. They had they started out with 165 men, and they came back with 60. So they lost a lot of people. Some of them sailed back. About 40 sailed back with Captain Winter, who turned tail and ran back to England, but there were quite a few lost.
And then did Maria reach Oregon, or
yes,
so she was. And then, can you say a little bit more about her?
She's sort of a mystery. She was she may have been pregnant when they picked her up, but she was pretty heavily pregnant by the time they dropped her off a few months later in Indonesia. So she was she was here. One of Fletcher, the really uptight minister or chaplain on the voyage, said that she was badly used by Drake's men, which certainly that's probably could have happened. But that he left her on an island that was a paradise that had a lot of food with two other black men is good. I mean, she was about ready to give birth. I don't know. It's there's a book by Miranda Kaufman that goes into more detail of her. Lately, I've been communicating with the University of Indonesia to see if there's any folklore or history about her, because we think we know what island that they dropped her off at. And it's very remote near Papua New Guinea and still very native. But I think there might be an oral history about her. So I'm going to pursue that. I don't know if it'll ever come to anything, but I want to know what happened to Maria.
So do I. I will, I know of a Journal of Oregon History that would be really interested in publishing that with you when you find out. So
okay, good to know.
We have a few folks who are readers of your book, and one is saying that wondering, a point of clarification, if you think Whale Cove was where Drake took anchorage, why do you dismiss that theory in the book by suggesting that it was further south, based on what this reader thinks is very dubious linguistic evidence? Can you speak a little bit more about where you fall on that line? And
we can't be 100% sure where Drake landed. And some of the linguistic stuff points to a Coos, the other words and phrases that I didn't cover tonight suggest Coos, maybe a Coos language, which is further south. And so that leaves it open, but the demographics on the Oregon coast are unknown. There was a tsunami, a lot of people were lost in 1700, and people and groups could have shifted around, but I'm not sure. And I'm 100% sure Drake wasn't in California, and I'm really almost 100% sure he was at Whale Cove, but I'm not quite sure. Does that answer the question?
That does answer that question. We have several other questions about Whale Cove, so I'll just combine those a little bit. Folks are interested to know where it is. Is there a recognizable city that's near that cove? And then someone else has wanted to know, as an archaeologist, have you come across any evidence? And they're noting they've been to Whale Cove, and the coast really seems to rise dramatically up from the shore, leaving very little area for a fort near the beach. So maybe the 1700 earthquake had an effect on it. So can you speak a little bit more about where it is and what evidence there may be or not there?
Whale Cove is a small cove just south of Depot Bay and north of Newport. And it does have a white cliff inside, but it's got a basalt armor peninsula that kind of protects it. It has eroded and changed shape over the last 400 years. Sorry, my phone. It has changed shape over the last 400 years. But there was a tsunami in 1700, and I did some archaeological work there. And the tsunami actually crested that, and it would have wiped out any evidence of a fort or anything like that. Further up, there might be more evidence, but we have yet to explore that. And these expeditions are hard to launch. They're very expensive. So we'll leave that for another day, but it's possible we could find some more evidence, but we'll see.
Yeah. There's folks asking about the reaction to your work. So somebody's wanting to know, are there people actively condemning the research, or have they given up? And then someone else is saying, oh, a lot of people still think that this landing at Drake's Bay is that Whale Cove is sort of a fringe theory, but there's so much weight to your evidence, and this person has read the book and found it fascinating. So what's the reaction been like? Do you think there's going to be a change?
The California theorists are, are not happy with me at all.
Uh-huh.
I met one at a
Yeah.
conference and he goes, "Who do you think you are?" And things like that. And I was just like, my gosh. And so they have a lock on the Wikipedia page and won't let anyone edit it and have called me fringe. So that's a word of caution about Wikipedia, people. That you know, it's go to the Oregon Encyclopedia. It's much
Yes.
better.
The Oregon Encyclopedia is published by OHS. It's peer reviewed, it's fact checked, and it's a
Yeah.
reliable source.
Yeah.
Was that plate of brass, that hoax plate of brass, was it on public display?
It's still on public display at the Bancroft
Mm.
Library, though, you know, they now admit that it's a hoax. And I think that the fact that Bolton did it, I'm very sure he did it, but the California Bancroft Library is withholding their judgment on that. And it's kind of a shock. This, you know, my book just came out this winter. And so people are just digesting it. And I think it's kind of a shock, and it's a huge paradigm shift. And I know this is hard for people to shift this way, but that's why we're doing History Pub tonight, so.
Yeah. Um, Someone is interested to know, you spoke some about the way that the evidence of this voyage was really suppressed, intentionally so. And so then what evidence, how did Shakespeare have these details to rely on for his work in The Tempest? Can you speak to that access?
Well, 8 or 9 years after the voyage, they finally put out an official account. And it was heavily censored and changed around, but Shakespeare could have access to that. And I'm sure he read it, because he was influenced by Hakluyt's accounts of other voyages too. So Shakespeare was pretty well read. I mean, you know, and this was a popular book. So, but it was still sort of a secret mission until they went to war with Spain. They were trying to keep this under wraps because war was brewing and it hadn't happened, and they didn't want Spain to know where they went. But finally, after the Armada in 1588, they felt it was okay to release some of the information, but it still came out in dribs and drabs, and Drake was mad. Drake wanted the full history of what he had done out there, because he had a big ego. Well, you know, he had a big ego, and he wrote a letter to the Queen and said, "I really want you to put out the whole thing about my voyage," and she never did. And then he died at sea in Panama, or off the coast of Panama, and things just got out of hand with wars and other things going on, and so it was put to the side. But you know, printing as it was back then, it wasn't very fast.
Is there any Drake monument at Whale Cove? Any sort of marker there that would raise this potential?
No. There's all over Drake's Bay and places like that commemorating Drake and Drake's Bay, but there's nothing at Whale Cove. And there's one in Southern Oregon, which they believe is Drake first went into a bad bay, and then he had to get out of that because it wasn't very good for careening. And so then he went into, well, another bay, the Fair and Good Bay. And there's one group says that the bad bay was Chetco Cove. And so there's a plaque in Oregon at Chetco Cove acknowledging this was Drake's bad bay, but that's incorrect. We're gonna have to take that out, I think. Okay. I don't know. All these plaques, they drive me crazy.
There's a question about
that. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. The papers that are from Drake's voyage, where are those available? How did you get to those, and when did they become publicly available?
I went to the British Library. You can register as a researcher at the British Library, and they just bring them out. I mean, I was touching paper that was written in, 1580 or something, it was like, and they just casually put it down, and I didn't even have to wear gloves. I don't know. Anyway, so I did also some research in Munich, where Robert Dudley's manuscript maps are. And I didn't get into that today, but there's a manuscript map that was probably made from Drake's original chart before it was destroyed or lost. And it shows maybe the coast of Oregon, and it shows Whale Cove maybe, and it's really good. So I went to Munich to see that. So, and I did a lot of research. I was in LA, was in Seattle in the ethnographic archives, but the Drake Chronicles are at the British Library.
And you can just register and go in and read the papers as a researcher.
Yeah, and the printed version is online. You can find it online. Just Google Hakluyt, the famous voyage, and it'll pop up.
Thank you. There's a question about the possibility of Nehalem Bay as a location. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Gary Gitson has been talking about that for years, and I think Nehalem Bay was actually, I think Drake went in there. I think that is called his Bad Bay.
Oh, I see.
You know, and I think he was there, but he escaped out and then came down to Whale Cove. And Gary and I agree to disagree on that, and we're comrades. We like each other.
Okay. That's, sometimes I say it's job security that we don't know everything about history. We just keep asking questions and keep doing the research. There's a question also about Maria and the Black men who were picked up, and they were freed and joined Drake, or Drake joined them, and had they been enslaved in Mexico? Can you say more about that group of folks?
Yeah, when Drake got to Guatulco, they came into the bay, and the townspeople were not surprised. They thought it was a Spanish ship. So some of Drake's men rowed into the port, got out of their boat, walked down the main street, went into the courthouse, and there 3 Black men were being tried for trying to burn down the town. And so Drake's men captured the mayor of the town, said, "We're going to loot your town. These men are free. Do you want to join our expedition?" 2 of them did. 1 escaped into the jungle. So Drake had this habit of freeing the Cimarrons, they were called, and they took those 2 Black men on the voyage, and then left them on the island, the Paradise Island, out in Indonesia.
Is there any indication of when they were left on that island, whether that was their choice?
No, we don't know.
Is there any way to tell? Yeah, okay.
No, I don't know. When you find interesting stuff, it always brings more questions and more questions. And so I don't know. I want to know.
Can you speak some? There's a question about a couple of other researchers, Stan Allen and Bob Ward, are probably names you know, but do you want to speak a little bit about the research community and other folks you've collaborated with and learned from and partnered with on this kind of work?
Well, Bob Ward was the one in the 70s that figured out that Drake probably was at Whale Cove. And he's been promoting that for years. And I think he's right. And I worked with him at first for a while. And he also came up with the theory that the muskrat is Drake's coney, and a couple other little sub ideas. But it's hard for a professional to work with non-professionals because their egos get involved. And so I decided I had to do this on my own. And, but I have respect for all the folks. Sam Balfe wrote a book about it called The Secret Voyage, or The Queen's Voyage, or anyway, Sam Balfe, look him up. His book goes in much more depth than I do about the maps and so forth. And I don't agree with some of his conclusions. He didn't agree with some of my conclusions. Bob Ward doesn't agree with many of my conclusions. Gary Gitson doesn't agree with many of my see, we don't always agree, but we are kind of circling each other a little bit with some idea that Drake was not in California, and we all agree on that.
And I think Bob Ward may be joining us from Facebook. So hi, Bob, if you're still there. Thanks for joining on to the call today. How far up the Oregon-Washington coast do you think they explored? Or were they just sort of blown over off the coast of what's now Washington and didn't actually land until farther south? Can you speak to that a bit?
Oh, I wish we had their records so I would know, because I know that if they were at Cape Flattery at 48 degrees north, the Indians would come out in their huge canoes and, greet them or, inspect them. Drake said he saw 5 or 6 islands, or I think it was John Drake said that, 5 or 6 islands and snow-capped mountains. So that, and they said 48 degrees north, that is Cape Flattery. And so he might have come in the Puget Sound a little bit, and then the ship was leaking. And they were looking for the Northwest Passage. And I don't know how, they only had a few days, maybe a week to do that. I mean, I've looked at the timeline, and I think that they were leaking. They had to go find a sandy shore. So I don't think we'll ever know. I don't think we'll ever find those records and know for sure, but I'm pretty sure he was up at 48 degrees.
Yeah. That's great. There's a question about what you think the 1700 tsunami, how it affected, if it affected Whale Cove. Can you speak at all to what changes it might have had at Nehalem Bay, which is where we think the Spanish galleon that wrecked about 100 years later wrecked. And folks may know we published a special issue of the Oregon Historical Quarterly on that subject in the summer of 2018, and that's available. So for folks who are interested in this Manila galleon wrecking, there's a lot there. But do you have any thoughts on how that tsunami may have changed Nehalem Bay? It might be too far outside.
Yeah, Scott Williams is the greatest on this one. And as far as I remember from his presentation, the tsunami went over top the whole bay and pushed water up the Nehalem River, and then sucked it back over the spit. And so things were all topsy-turvy and messed around. And when I did excavation at Whale Cove, there's hardly any soil buildup at the top of the cliff. And so I know that it got scoured, and the most logical thing is it was in 1700. And the archaeological sites that are nearby show a disturbed area and then clean deposits. So we know that the top of the soil was just jumbled around. So the tsunami did really hit pretty hard on the Oregon coast in 1700.
That's something, that cliff is so large at that cove, and just it gives you a way to imagine a wave scouring the top of that. Wow.
Yeah.
So we have a question or a comment from your colleague Bob Ward, wondering about evidence that it has been compiled that wasn't included in your book. Is glad to see that you agree that Whale Cove was his anchorage. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how you made the decisions about what to include in the book. It's really a book that looks at not only the history of this voyage and the landing, but then also so much of the controversy over this history. And, it's a 16th century history and a 20th century history, all in one book. How did you decide what to put in and what to leave out in thinking about staking out your arguments on this history? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, it is. As an archaeologist, I go from data and provenience and where artifacts are found. There's been some artifacts found that aren't tied to a stratigraphic level that can be dated. There's rumors of swords and rumors of Spanish helmets and rumors of other artifacts that might be there. But I can't use that as data. I would have been attacked by other archaeologists and historians saying it's floating. You can't tie it into anything for sure. So I had to walk a straight and narrow path and only go with the data. This was such an important topic and subject that I thought I have to keep it solid on solid ground and not imagine that, even the coin that was found in the Halem Bay, maybe someone dropped it out of their pocket in 1961. We don't know. It could have been a collector down there. So unless I have something real and concrete and rumors of silver bars in caves on the ocean, I just can't go with any of that. So sorry.
That's okay. I appreciate you taking that question. Well, I would say thank you so much, Melissa. This has just been fascinating, and I appreciate you putting so much of this into a short History Pub presentation for us this evening. Thank you. And thank you all folks for joining us online. We've recorded the program, so we'll post it on the OHS website so folks can look back and rewatch and check in and share it with your friends. But just really appreciate everyone logging in, and History Pub will take place again on the last Monday of August. Will be a history of amusement parks in Oregon, and that'll be broadcast through the McMenamins Facebook page, so you'll be able to watch live there. So you can imagine going to an amusement park, which most folks probably don't want to do right now. So it'll be fun. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.